Andrew Parker, 72, had lived long enough to know that family gatherings in Texas could be just as hot and uncomfortable as the August sun. He had no plans to attend his son Daniel's birthday that year, not after the last time he'd been humiliated in front of a crowd. But a week before the event, his daughter-in-law, Melissa, called. Her voice was sugary but insistent. Daniel was turning 45. They just had a Brazilian hardwood pool deck built, and it would mean the world if Andrew came. He tried to decline, claiming his hip had been acting up, but Melissa pressed on about how Daniel had been bragging to his friends that his father would be there. Against his better judgment, he agreed. On the day of the party, he arrived precisely at 2 in the afternoon, timing it so he could slip in with the other guests and avoid long, awkward small talk. The driveway was crammed with gleaming trucks and sports cars, their chrome flashing in the relentless sunlight. Laughter and country music spilled from the backyard, mingling with the smell of mesquite-smoked brisket. Inside, Melissa greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, glancing over his button-down shirt and clean jeans, as though assessing whether he was presentable enough for their company. "Everyone's out back. Daniel just opened his gifts," she said, motioning for him to follow. He spotted expensive gadgets, designer watches, and even a set of keys that looked suspiciously like they belonged to a new fishing boat. For his own birthday 6 months earlier, he'd received nothing more than a card with a $20 bill inside. In the yard, Daniel was holding court by the pool, beer in hand, surrounded by friends who laughed a little too loudly at his stories. When he spotted Andrew, his smile was forced, his hug too firm, more a show of dominance than affection. "Glad you made it, old man," Daniel said, his words just slightly slurred. Andrew muttered a polite greeting, already planning to leave within the hour. He found a seat near the shade, sipping water while the heat pressed down on his shoulders. But soon, Daniel's focus shifted to him. "Hey, Dad, come try out the new deck. Give it the Parker seal of approval." There was a glimmer in Daniel's eye, the same one Andrew had seen decades ago, before some mean-spirited prank. The boards shone unnaturally, reflecting the harsh afternoon sun. Andrew hesitated, then took a step. His foot slid instantly. Before he could catch himself, both legs shot forward and his back and head slammed into the pool's concrete edge. Pain detonated through his spine, sharp and blinding. He tried to move, but nothing happened. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. "Help! I can't feel my legs," he gasped. Daniel's smirk deepened. "Walk it off. Stop being a baby." Melissa's voice followed, sharp and cold. "You're ruining his birthday." Around them, guests watched in uneasy silence as Andrew lay there, motionless under the burning Texas sky. Andrew stared up at the endless blue Texas sky, the sun glaring so hard it felt like it was burning straight through him. Sweat rolled down his temples, stinging his eyes, but the searing pain in his back and the terrifying absence of feeling in his legs drowned out everything else. His breathing came in shallow bursts as he tried again to move his toes, praying for any twitch, but there was nothing. "I can't feel my legs," he said louder this time, his voice cracking with urgency. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another, but no one made a move. Daniel stood over him, hands on his hips, smirking like this was some kind of show for his friends. "Dad, quit the drama," he scoffed, the words slurred from too many beers. "You slipped. You're fine. Just get up." Melissa stepped closer, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said coldly, her gaze flicking toward the other guests. "And in front of everyone, no less. Can we not do this today?" Andrew's mind reeled. This wasn't just indifference, it was deliberate humiliation. He turned his head and spotted Linda, his wife of nearly 50 years, emerging from the crowd. Relief flickered through him for the first time. Surely, she would see the seriousness of the situation. She knelt down beside him, her face tight with irritation rather than concern. "Andrew," she whispered sharply, "enough with this. You've always had a flair for the dramatic, but this is too much. People are staring." He swallowed hard, stunned by her words. "I'm serious," he pleaded. "Something's wrong. Call an ambulance." Linda shook her head, glancing around the yard before leaning closer. "We'll take you inside, let you rest for a bit. You don't need to ruin the party." The heat was making him nauseous now, each second stretching into an eternity. His body felt heavier by the moment, after the numbness spreading upward from his waist. He thought of the years he'd pushed through pain and sickness without complaint, never wanting to be a burden, and now, when he truly needed help, they wouldn't listen. The murmur of the crowd was broken by a firm, clear voice. "I'm a paramedic. Let me through." A woman in her late 30s knelt beside him, brushing past Linda without hesitation. She introduced herself as Rachel, her tone brisk but kind. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" Andrew Parker," he managed, his voice barely more than a whisper. "All right, Andrew," Rachel said, her hands already assessing him with practiced precision. She asked where he felt pain, checked his pulse, and pressed gently along his legs. "Can you feel this?" she asked. He shook his head. "Can you wiggle your toes?" Again, nothing. Rachel's face tightened. "We need to keep you completely still. This may be a spinal injury." She reached for her phone. "I'm calling 911. "That's not necessary," Linda interrupted sharply. "We can drive him ourselves." Rachel didn't even look up. "Absolutely not. Moving him improperly could make this permanent. He needs immobilization and professional transport." Daniel gave an exaggerated sigh, looking to his friends for support. "This is ridiculous. It's not like he fell off the roof." Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes locking on him. "What exactly happened here?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "It was a joke. I put some of Dad's deck oil on the boards. I thought he'd slip a little and fall in the pool. I didn't think." "You didn't think?" Rachel repeated flatly, her voice cold enough to cut through the thick Texas heat. Around them, the party atmosphere had evaporated. Guests stood in tense clusters, whispering and avoiding Andrew's gaze. Rachel spoke into her phone, her voice low and controlled, giving their location and the details of Andrew's condition. "Possible spinal cord injury. Elderly male. Suspected hazardous condition deliberately created," she said. "Request police presence as well." Melissa bristled. "Police? Are you kidding me?" Rachel ignored her, slipping her phone into her pocket and placing a steadying hand on Andrew's arm. "Help is on the way. You just focus on staying still." Andrew's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. The embarrassment and betrayal cut deeper than the pain. He could hear the sound of a siren in the distance, growing louder, and the murmuring of the crowd as they edged away, wanting no part of whatever was about to unfold. Linda straightened her dress, her face pale, but still more concerned with appearances than her husband's condition. Daniel muttered something to a friend about overreactions, but avoided looking at Andrew. The minutes dragged until the sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of the ambulance. Paramedics pushed through the backyard gate, their stretcher ready. "Andrew Parker?" one called. Rachel quickly briefed them. "Elderly male. Fall on oiled deck. Immediate paralysis from the waist down. Suspected spinal trauma." One paramedic knelt beside Andrew, telling him they'd stabilize his neck, roll him onto a backboard, and get him to the hospital. As they worked, Andrew caught sight of Daniel standing off to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight. Not with worry, but with the realization that his joke had crossed a line he couldn't step back from. The distant wail of another siren, a police cruiser, cut through the thick air. For the first time that afternoon, Andrew felt a flicker of something besides pain. The sense that maybe, just maybe, someone was finally going to take him seriously. The wail of the second siren grew louder until a police cruiser rolled to a stop out front, its lights spinning silently in the afternoon sun. The paramedics were already working with swift efficiency, fitting a rigid cervical collar around Andrew's neck to keep him from moving, while Rachel stayed kneeling by his side like a steadfast guard. "We're going to roll you carefully onto a backboard, Andrew. Don't try to help us. Just stay still." The lead paramedic, a woman named Sarah, instructed, her voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. One of her partners, Mike, moved toward the section of deck where Andrew had fallen, crouching down to inspect the boards. He rubbed his fingers across the surface, then held them up, slick and glistening in the sunlight. "This is oil," he confirmed, his voice grim. Rachel's gaze immediately shifted to Daniel, who was standing back with his arms crossed, his smirk long gone. "Sir, did you put this here?" Sarah asked directly. Daniel shifted his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting toward the house as if searching for an escape route. "I told you. It was a joke. I didn't think he'd fall like that. Just thought he might slip a little, maybe end up in the pool." The temperature in the backyard seemed to drop with those words, the casual cruelty of them settling over the gathering like a heavy cloud. Sarah's jaw tightened. Creating a hazardous condition that causes serious injury is not a joke, it's a criminal act. Linda stepped forward, her face flushed, her voice rising. This is absurd. He's fine. We can take him inside. Sarah cut her off sharply. Ma'am, your husband is not fine. He has no sensation in his legs, which is a medical emergency. You delayed calling for help, and now we have evidence that this injury may have been caused intentionally. The police will be handling this from here. As if on cue, two officers entered the yard, Officer Ramirez and Detective Calloway, both scanning the tense crowd. What's going on here? Ramirez asked, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Andrew immobilized on the stretcher. Rachel wasted no time, explaining how she'd found Andrew, the lack of sensation in his legs, the slickness of the deck, and Daniel's own admission. Calloway turned to Daniel. Is that accurate? Did you intentionally apply oil to this deck, knowing someone might walk on it? Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't think it would be a big deal. And after he fell, did you call for medical help? Calloway pressed. Daniel hesitated, glancing at his mother. No. We thought he was exaggerating. Linda chimed in quickly. He's always been dramatic. We didn't want to make a scene. Ma'am, Ramirez said evenly. When someone says they can't feel their legs after a fall, you call an ambulance immediately. Failing to do so can be considered criminal negligence. The guests had gone quiet, the tension palpable. A few quietly slipped away toward the side gate, unwilling to be witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Sarah and her team lifted Andrew carefully, strapping him securely to the backboard and then transferring him to the stretcher. Even that slight shift sent fresh bolts of agony shooting through his back, forcing a cry from his lips despite his best effort to stay composed. Hang in there, Andrew, Sarah murmured. We're getting you out of here. Getting you out of here. As they wheeled him toward the gate, Andrew caught sight of Daniel standing motionless, his face pale and tight, and Linda clutching her handbag like a lifeline. Melissa stood beside her, arms still crossed, expression unreadable. Outside, the summer heat seemed even more intense as the ambulance doors swung open. Sarah and Mike loaded him inside, Rachel following to give a quick handover of her observations and the timeline of events. We'll follow you to the hospital, Detective Calloway told Sarah before turning back to the yard. And sir, she said to Daniel, I'll need you to stay here for questioning. Questioning? Daniel's voice cracked. I told you it was a joke. A joke that resulted in serious bodily injury, Calloway said flatly. And we'll also be talking to your mother and wife about why they delayed calling for help. Andrew lay inside the ambulance, the whir of medical equipment surrounding him. Sarah started an IV in his arm, her movements brisk but gentle. We're going to give you something for the pain, she said. It'll take the edge off until we can get you into imaging. The ambulance lurched forward, siren wailing now, cutting through the heavy air as the vehicle sped toward Austin General Hospital. Andrew closed his eyes, trying to process the past half hour. The physical pain was immense, but the emotional blow cut even deeper, knowing that the people who should have cared for him most had dismissed his suffering without a second thought. At the hospital, the ER team was ready. They transferred him onto a trauma bed, fitting oxygen tubing under his nose and hooking him to monitors. The beeping filled the air, joined by the distant chatter of nurses and the rolling of gurneys through the hallway. A young doctor introduced himself, performed a quick neurological exam, and confirmed the next step, an urgent MRI to assess spinal cord damage. As they wheeled him toward radiology, Andrew caught a glimpse of Detective Calloway entering the ER, notepad in hand. She approached the nurse's station, her presence calm but commanding. Hours later, after scans and the start of pain management, Andrew was told Dr. Martinez, a neurosurgeon, would speak with him about the results. When she entered, her face was serious. Mr. Parker, she began, pulling up the MRI images, you've sustained an incomplete spinal cord injury at the T12L1 level. That means the spinal cord wasn't fully severed, which gives us some hope, but there's significant damage. We've performed surgery to stabilize your spine and relieve pressure. Andrew swallowed hard. Will I walk again? Dr. Martinez hesitated. It's too soon to know. Recovery depends on how your body responds to therapy. but you should prepare for the possibility of long-term mobility challenges. Not long after, Calloway entered his room, her notepad still in hand. Mr. Parker, I'd like to get your statement while it's fresh in your mind. We've spoken to several witnesses, and your son has admitted to putting oil on the deck. Your wife and daughter-in-law also admitted they didn't believe you were seriously hurt, which delayed emergency care. That's being reviewed as criminal negligence. Andrew told her everything. The invitation, the forced participation, Daniel's challenge to test the deck, the slip, the impact, the numbness, the humiliation of being told to walk it off. Calloway listened without interruption, jotting down key points. "Thank you," she said finally. "Your statement, combined with witness accounts and physical evidence, gives us a strong case. Your son has been taken into custody, and your wife and daughter-in-law will be questioned further. We'll keep you informed." As she left, Andrew felt an unexpected wave of relief. For the first time in years, someone was treating his pain as real, his word as credible. The day had left him broken in body, but not entirely in spirit. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the hospital walls, justice had begun to move in his favor. Andrew woke to the sterile hum of hospital machines, the air thick with the faint scent of antiseptic and something metallic. His body felt heavy, pinned to the bed not by straps, but by the dead weight of his lower half. The memory of the fall came rushing back, the gleam of the deck, the sudden slip, the cold crack of concrete against his spine. And with it, the echo of Daniel's voice mocking him as he lay motionless. A nurse named Carlos appeared at his side, checking his vitals and offering a sip of water through a straw. "The doctor will be here soon to explain everything," he said softly. Moments later, Dr. Martinez walked in, her expression composed but grave. She sat by his bed and pulled up the MRI scans. "Mr. Parker, you've suffered an incomplete spinal cord injury at the T12L1 level. 2 vertebrae were fractured, and there was significant pressure on your spinal cord. We performed surgery to remove bone fragments and stabilize your spine." Andrew's voice was hoarse. "Will I ever walk again?" Dr. Martinez didn't rush her answer. "It's too early to say. Incomplete injuries offer some potential for recovery, but outcomes vary. You may regain some function with intensive therapy, or you may continue to need assistive devices for mobility. We'll work with you to maximize your independence." The words landed heavy in his chest, but before he could process them fully, Detective Calloway entered, notepad in hand. She explained that Daniel had been charged with felony reckless endangerment, while Linda and Melissa were under investigation for negligence in failing to call for help. "We've spoken to multiple witnesses," she said. "They all confirm you repeatedly said you couldn't feel your legs and asked for an ambulance, but your family dismissed you. That delay could have worsened your injury." Andrew's throat tightened. "So if they'd called right away," Calloway nodded. "The sooner spinal injuries are treated, the better the prognosis. It's possible earlier intervention could have lessened the damage." Her words confirmed what Andrew had feared, a truth that hurt almost as much as the injury itself. As she left, an assistant district attorney named Laura Jensen arrived. She laid out his legal rights, explaining that beyond the criminal case, he could file a civil suit for damages. "Spinal cord injuries can cost millions over a lifetime," she said. "Medical care, home modifications, loss of income. Your family's actions directly contributed to this. You deserve compensation to cover your needs." Andrew hesitated. "They're my family." Laura's tone was gentle but firm. "They failed you in the most basic way. This isn't revenge. It's ensuring you have the resources to live." The next day, a personal injury attorney named Michael Greenberg visited, reviewing the case and confirming its strength. "Your son's own admission makes liability clear," he said. "Your wife and daughter-in-law's negligence is also documented. Their homeowner's insurance will cover part, but we may need to pursue their personal assets." Andrew agreed, the decision sitting uneasily in his gut. That evening, his rehabilitation plan began. A physical therapist named David came to assess his movement and sensation. Andrew couldn't lift his feet or bend his knees, but he could feel faint tingling in his thighs, a small but hopeful sign. "We'll work with what we have," David said. "The goal isn't just walking, it's giving you control over your life again." Over the following days, Andrew was fitted with a wheelchair and began learning how to transfer from bed to chair, how to maneuver through tight spaces, and how to prevent pressure sores. The work was exhausting, but the structure gave him something to hold on to. Still, the emotional wounds ran deep. He couldn't stop replaying the moment when Linda knelt beside him in the yard, not with concern, but with irritation. Or the way Daniel had smirked as he admitted the joke that had destroyed Andrew's mobility. News from the outside world filtered in through the detectives. Daniel had been denied bail pending trial, and Linda and Melissa were avoiding all contact. The house where Andrew had once lived and built his family now felt like an alien place he would never return to. On the fifth day, Marcus, a hospital social worker, sat with him to discuss long-term care. "Once you're medically stable, you'll move to an inpatient rehabilitation facility," Marcus explained. "You'll be there for several weeks before transitioning home or to a modified living arrangement if needed." Andrew's small house in rural Texas had narrow hallways and steps at every entrance. Marcus outlined grants, insurance coverage, and community programs to help make it accessible. "You'll need ramps, widened doors, and a roll-in shower at the very least," he said. That night, alone in his hospital bed, Andrew stared at the ceiling, the rhythmic beep of the monitors matching the slow cadence of his thoughts. He had spent a lifetime providing for his family, believing that loyalty meant forgiveness, even when it hurt him. Now he realized that loyalty had been a one-way street, and it had left him vulnerable in the most dangerous way. His injury wasn't just the result of a fall. It was the final outcome of years of dismissal, of being treated as a burden or a prop. In the quiet, Andrew made himself a promise. Whatever lay ahead, whether he walked again or not, he would never again allow anyone to treat his pain as anything less than real. This injury had taken his legs, but it would not take his dignity. And as the days passed, he felt a strange new resolve settle in alongside the grief. A determination to rebuild, not just his body, but his life, free from those who had shown they didn't value it. The months that followed were a blur of medical routines, slow progress, and an unshakable mix of anger and determination. Andrew was transferred from the hospital to a specialized spinal cord injury rehabilitation center in San Antonio, a bright, sprawling facility filled with others whose lives had been upended in an instant. His days began early, starting with physical therapy sessions, where David, who had followed his case from the hospital, pushed him through exercises to strengthen what muscles still worked. There were mornings when Andrew managed to stand between the parallel bars with braces strapped to his legs, holding himself up for a few seconds longer than the day before. There were other mornings when the pain was so intense he could barely concentrate, his body rebelling against the relentless demands of recovery. Afternoons were for occupational therapy, learning new ways to manage daily tasks, dressing himself from a seated position, cooking without standing, maneuvering a wheelchair through tight spaces. The smallest victories, a button fastened without help, a transfer from bed to chair without assistance, were celebrated like milestones. In the evenings, he often met with a therapist named Claire, who specialized in trauma. Together, they unpacked not just the fall, but the decades of subtle and not so subtle neglect that had led to that moment. Claire helped him name things he had long buried. The years of being treated as less than, the times his needs were minimized, the way Daniel had always been protected, no matter what harm he caused. "They failed you," Claire said one night, her voice steady. "This injury didn't just happen. It was made possible by the pattern they set long before the deck was oiled." Andrew didn't argue. The truth had become undeniable. Outside of rehab, the legal process moved forward. 6 months after the injury, Daniel accepted a plea deal, 2 years in prison for felony reckless endangerment. Linda and Melissa received 2 years probation, community service, and mandatory counseling for negligence. It wasn't the kind of justice that erased the damage, but it was a public acknowledgement that what had happened to him was criminal, not just unfortunate. The civil case followed, with Michael Greenberg guiding him through depositions and negotiations. The evidence, the photographs of the oiled deck, Rachel's eyewitness account, and multiple witness statements, was undeniable. The settlement came 8 months after filing. $1.5 million from a combination of the family's homeowner's insurance and the sale of Daniel's fishing boat and investment property. The money went into a trust for Andrew's medical care, home modifications, and living expenses. It was enough to keep him independent, but it couldn't buy back what he had lost. After 6 months in rehab, Andrew moved into a small, single-story home in a quiet neighborhood outside Austin. The house had wide doorways, ramps, and a bathroom designed for wheelchair access. A part-time caregiver came in the mornings to help with heavy chores, but otherwise, Andrew managed on his own. It wasn't the life he had planned for his 70s, but it was a life he had shaped himself, one no longer at the mercy of people who dismissed his needs. He found a new community in unexpected places, a local adaptive sports group, a church men's breakfast that welcomed him without pity, and an online forum for spinal cord injury survivors where he shared tips and encouragement with newcomers. Twice a week, he volunteered at the same rehab center where he'd learned to walk a few steps again, mentoring patients who had just arrived, dazed and scared. "Don't let the ones who ignored your pain define you," he'd tell them. "Your life's still yours to live." That work gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. His body still had limits. He could walk short distances with crutches and braces, but most days he used his wheelchair. He had regained about 60% sensation in his lower body, though it came with strange side effects. Hypersensitivity in some areas, pins and needles numbness in others. Some days the pain was sharp and unrelenting. Other days he moved with surprising ease. But the biggest change wasn't physical, it was internal. Andrew no longer craved the approval of the people who had failed him. He hadn't spoken to Linda, Melissa, or Daniel since the legal proceedings ended. Daniel had written to him twice from prison. The second letter, a genuine apology that Andrew read but never replied to. Linda had moved to Florida with Melissa, telling neighbors a heavily edited version of events that cast her as the devoted wife of a man who'd suffered a tragic accident. The lies no longer bothered Andrew. They had no power over his life anymore. In their place, he had built something stronger. Relationships based on mutual respect. Rachel, the paramedic who had intervened that day, checked in on him occasionally, sometimes bringing her kids by to visit. David remained a close friend, often joining him for coffee or backyard barbecues. Claire continued as his therapist, guiding him through the lingering grief and helping him recognize how far he had come. One evening, sitting on his back porch as the Texas sun dipped low, Andrew reflected on the strange path his life had taken since that day on the deck. He still carried the scars, both visible and invisible, but he also carried proof of his resilience. The man who had once been dismissed as fragile and overly dramatic had survived a deliberate act meant to humiliate him, endured the betrayal of those closest to him, and come out the other side with his dignity intact. "You've done more than survive," Claire had told him recently. "You've built something new." And she was right. His life now wasn't defined by the injury or the people who caused it. It was defined by the choices he made every day to keep moving forward. He didn't know if he would ever walk without assistance again, but he knew this. He would never again let someone else decide whether his pain was real or his voice worth hearing. As the cicadas sang in the warm night air, Andrew smiled faintly, feeling the quiet weight of his hard-earned freedom.